Welcome into beautiful Las Vegas here on this September day. We are getting ready for UFC 266. Vegas really becoming a sports town over the last few years. You got Monday Night Football, the Raiders over the Legion a couple weeks ago, and now tonight UFC 266, a featherweight title matchup between Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega. But a lot more fights on the card to discuss, and I am here to do so with my partner Ian Parker. I am Brett Okamoto, and this show, if you're just tuning in, you're not sure what this is about, the only thing that we're interested with this show is putting money in your wallet. If you want to bet the fights, if you want to have a little bit of action on UFC 266, you are in the right place. We are going to tell you, hopefully, Ian, as long as Ian knows what he's talking about, we are going to tell you how to do that. Ian, what are you thinking of this UFC 266 card? We're going to start with the early prelims here. What stands out to you just generally? What kind of fights are you looking forward to on the early prelims?
You know what, the early prelims, we got to get some underdogs in there. You know, we see Jalen Turner plus 105. We see a big favorite, Semmelsberger. We're going to discuss how we're going to get true value out of the guy in him. And then the lead off the card with Jonathan Pierce and Omar Morales. That's the closest one on there. We're going to show us why a guy at minus 150 is okay to still throw straight.
Yeah, well, like as you mentioned, you know, these fights are coming up quick. We're only an hour away, so you're getting the most up-to-date information on these fights. Let's start with that first one, Jonathan Pierce versus Omar Morales, the curtain jerker. You spoke about it there just a little bit. Where are you going with your money on this fight?
So sometimes experience plays a big time situation here, and along with styles make fights. I'm going to go with Omar Morales at minus 150. I believe that he is deservedly to be the favorite. Those leg kicks, his level of competition, and he's got a chin that with Pierce, if he can't dictate the pace, to me, this is all Morales here. We're going to go with him at minus 150.
Okay, minus 150. Obviously, if you're taking Morales, you feel like there's value there, right? In your opinion, where should this line be for Morales?
You know what? It surprised me it's actually that low based on the level of competition he's had. I would have put him at minus 175. Now, that doesn't take away what Pierce has done in his first fight. However, those leg kicks to the body, the striking, and just the experience overall level of competition, to me, this is a big step up for Pierce, and this is exactly where Morales wants to be to build himself up to get to the next level in the UFC.
I'll tell you what, Ian, on these early prelims, we got a lot of fights that are pretty close when it comes to lines. Not this next one, right? Matthew Semmelsberger taking on Martin Sano. Matthew Semmelsberger is a significant betting favorite here, so is there any way that you can put some action down on this fight?
I'm glad you asked. The best way to really do this here is to take a guy like this and throw him into a parlay, which we're going to do later on. At minus 500, that's just way too much to lay straight. Anything could happen in MMA. So what we're going to do, and we'll recap this later on towards the end, at minus 500, we're going to throw him into a parlay with several other guys that will get us plus money. Therefore, we can enjoy that fight and walk away making money.
Got it. That minus 500 always looks a little bit better on a parlay. Okay,
Absolutely.
So next fight, Cody Brundage versus Nick Maximov. What are you seeing here in this matchup?
For me, sometimes a no bet is the best bet. And for me, you got two guys that are very green in the UFC. Cody took this on short notice. If you want to play an underdog and you're okay with doing a coin flip, I think sprinkling a little bit on him is okay. However, for me, this is a no play. Sit back and enjoy this fight, and hopefully these guys just come to bring violence in the best way possible.
You know, in general, you mentioned that Cody Brundage took this fight on short notice. We've been seeing a lot of that, especially over the last year, obviously with the circumstances around the world. What have you found in terms of what are you looking for when these guys are taking short notice fights?
It's a good question. When these guys take the fight on short notice, what we try to do here is look for their style. We're trying to see if cardio is going to be a factor. We're going to see if their wrestling, striking just plays at a more of a disadvantage towards the other fighter. So sometimes short notice is okay. However, these guys are so close in their skills that to me, it's just a risk we don't really need to take when there's so much other value on the card.
Yep. Well, a lot more fights to talk about here. UFC 266 prelims. We just went through the early prelims. Now take a look at these sort of later prelims, I guess you could say. And wow, I mean, the UFC 266 is really kind of they're kind of spoiling us here on this Saturday. Marlon Moraes versus Merab Dvalishvili. Dan Hooker, Nasrat Haqparast. Obviously, a lot of circumstances to talk to leading into that fight. Roxanne Modafferi, Talia Santos, who has really impressed me. Santos recently, she's ranked there number 12. Modafferi number 9. Let's start there with that flyweight fight. How do you see these two matching up?
You know what? For Roxanne, she seems to be a huge underdog all the time, and she likes to play that role of the underdog. For me, though, this is just not a great matchup for her. Talia Santos is mean. She's tough. She's so well-rounded. You know, the line we've seen also has jumped in her favor. This is another situation where we are going to take a big favor to try and maximize it and put it into a parlay to get plus money. That's what we're going to have to do. Otherwise, too big of a risk, and I just feel that if Roxanne gets this fight to the floor, that's her shot. I just don't see it happening, so we're going to roll with Santos.
Yeah, it is a tough ask. last to try and get this fight to the ground if you're Roxy. However, I will say Roxy has done a good job over her career in making underdog bettors happy. In fact, she told me that she has constantly gotten emails from strangers saying, hey, you made me money. So if you're going with Santos, hopefully that doesn't happen for you tonight. Let's jump to this fight because I know you like the lightweight fight between Dan Hooker and Nasrat Haqparast. A lot of different ways we could look at this fight, but from a betting perspective and then the circumstances, both of them flying in on short notice, what stands out to you here?
I'm actually surprised that Dan Hooker is only minus 155. I would have put him at minus 195 just because of the level of competition he has fought. Now, granted, his last 2 fights, he's lost, you know, with Michael Chandler getting TKO'd, but how do we ignore the rounds 1 and 2 against Dustin Poirier? How do we ignore the fight against Gilbert Durinho? How do we just ignore everything that Dan Hooker brings to the table? He's got a good chin, he could strike, and we don't really see the ground game that much. In this fight, he could put Nasrat on his back and really take 2 rounds, which I think will happen. So at minus 155, I think it's a steal for Dan Hooker.
Yeah, and we were talking about this fight earlier this week, Ian, and you brought up the early work that he did against Dustin Poirier, which I thought, when you brought it up, was a fair comparison. I see similarities, I guess, in just what Nasrat likes to do, what Dustin likes to do. And Dan Hooker, we forget this now because Dustin went on to grind that fight out and ended up going on to do bigger and better things. But this guy was beating Dustin Poirier in a fight not too long ago.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's what I'm saying. In this type of fight where he's fighting a guy who's just strong in his Muay Thai, if Hooker brings that output, if he brings that volume, keeps his chin down, and then threatens the takedowns like he did against Dustin, he was dominating Dustin Poirier. That wasn't just a close. Those first 2 rounds were clearly Dan Hooker. If we see that same Dan Hooker, which I think we will, I think he gets back in the win column and right back up. And his confidence, he's through the roof. He's having so much fun since he's gotten here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, next one I want to talk about is Shamil Abdurakhimov versus Chris Daukaus. I thought I nailed that. Abdurakhimov. What do you think about that matchup?
You said that perfectly. Not that I'm really great at pronunciations either.
I want to hear you say it now.
I don't want to say it. You know, don't fix it if it's not broken, Brett, please. With Chris Daukaus, look, this fight's been rescheduled a few times, and Daukaus has looked super impressive in his last couple of fights. However, again, at minus 200, I'm not comfortable laying straight money. So in this situation, what we're going to really try and get the value is we're going to take Daukaus to win by TKO or KO at plus 120. You know, when we look at Shamil in his last couple of fights, when he's been knocked out, it's been a guy that carries power and an athletic heavyweight, and that's who he's getting here in Chris Daukaus. Daukaus is ready to bring it. I like him at that odds, plus 120, to finish the fight by TKO or KO, and we're going to keep making money that way.
How do you end up comparing those odds? When do you know that, okay, of course, if I do a method of victory, I'm going to get a better line, right? But how do you know that how do you compare those 2 lines and realize that, yeah, there is enough value for me to, you know, kind of narrow down my focus on how the guy can win?
I try to break it down by the way he's been winning his fights and how his style kind of plays into the matchup. And for the way that Shamil has lost with the way that Daukaus has really won, that seems to be the play. You know, when you got 2 guys, especially Daukaus has had a few fights in his career and needs to get the win and wants to keep impressing to move up this heavyweight ladder, minus 200 is still too much for a guy we haven't seen a lot of. That's what happens when guys knock people out too quick also, right? Yep. So if we're going to play that, which I think we can, that's where we're going to shrink it down to size. And the fact we're getting plus money, can't miss with that.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to talking about this next fight as well. 135 pounds, Marlon Moraes versus Merab Dvalishvili. Just a few years ago, Marlon Moraes looked like he was going to be the UFC champ, man. I mean, he even went in and won that first round against Henry Cejudo. You were thinking to yourself, I believe that fight was in Chicago. I was watching it. Merab's got this, right? And then Henry Cejudo, just being the competitor that he is, went in, won that fight. And since then, Merab has had a very tough time. He's been knocked out in his last 2 fights. Are we kind of sleeping now on Marlon Moraes, on how good this guy is, or are we really buying into what Merab Dvalishvili is doing with one of the longest win streaks in the division?
You know, this is a challenging one because, to your point, Moraes has fought the top and Merab is on the way up. And sometimes we're going to find out more, I think, about Merab than we are with Marlon. For Merab, the style here, he's got to get away from the striking. We see him getting a little bit more confident in that, right? Because his takedowns are so good. We know what Merab is about. He's a cardio machine. He's a takedown machine. Position over submission. So for Merab, he has to put this fight to the floor. He's got to get Merab on his back. He can't get cute with the leg kicks and the spinning stuff because Marlon will execute. We've seen those kicks against Jimmy Rivera, against Cejudo, to your point, where he got that round in his pocket. I think right now for Merab, he just has to wrestle, cardio, and for Marlon, it's just about survival.
Have you seen any blueprint in any of Marlon's previous fights that leads you to believe that he can't deal with the wrestling of Merab?
I don't think anyone is going to be able to deal with the wrestling of Merab just because of the cardio. He's just a tank. He comes at you, and he doesn't stop till the fight gets to the floor. You know, we've seen Marlon, his takedown defense, it's good, but Merab is just different. This is a guy that can go 100 miles an hour for 3 rounds. When you're fighting someone like that, you can't even get your striking off. You're too scared of the takedown. And then because of that, Merab may look like a fantastic striker tonight. And then when the striking starts working, takedowns right to the ground.
Sure.
So I think that's how Merab plays this.
Okay, so I'm getting the sense that you like Merab, obviously. So how do you bet him? You just bet him straight up, or you like a method for this one as well?
You know, minus 260 is a little rough for me again.
It's a little high.
It's a little high, especially to your point, because Marlon is still Marlon, and he still is fought the top of the top. In that situation, I do think that Marlon survives. I don't see much of a finish out of Merab. I don't think we've seen him finish, period. I like him to win by decision at plus 110.
All right, Merab Dvalishvili by decision. That wraps up the early prelims, the prelims. Before we get to the main card, Ian, I want you to give me, you know, anybody can sit up here and tell us, bet the favorite, right? Bet the chalk. Give me your favorite underdog on the early portion of the card.
You know, we've seen a lot of, we have been taking a lot of favorites, but we've been shrinking it down and getting it plus money. So we can't be called the chalk masters just yet, and we got to show our skill a little bit here, right? For me, it's Jalen Turner at plus 105. He's had more experience in the UFC, a guy in Eurosmenage who's very tough. We've seen this guy against Alon Cruz and on the Contender Series just destroy people. But Turner is also one of the taller, rangier strikers. Also, he's got a ground game. He's got brown belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He has the ability to submit his opponent. We have not seen Medage on his back yet. So for me, Jalen Turner, as long as he is able to avoid and weather the storm early, he can get this fight to the floor. And at plus 105 with a guy with that much experience to compare to someone who doesn't have much, my money's on Turner at plus 105.
All right, well, plenty to look for on the early fights of UFC 266, but let's talk about this main card, right? An absolutely outstanding main card of UFC 266. You got Jessica Andrade versus Cynthia Calvillo. I think that's a huge fight in the flyweight division. Curtis Blades trying to bounce back from that knockout loss to Derek Lewis against Jairzinho Rozenstruik. The return of Nick Diaz, Mr. 209 himself, Valentina Shevchenko, Lauren Murphy, and then, of course, the main event, the featherweight title fight. Let's start with the first flyweight fight right up there, Ian. Jessica Andrade versus Cynthia Calvillo. Andrade, you know, former strawweight champion. She's fought as high as 135 pounds. Cynthia has been very impressive at 125, though. I think she has a complete skill set. How do you see these two matching up?
I agree with you, but the thing with Cynthia, what got her to this point is the wrestling, and she's going to try and wrestle an absolute tank in Jessica Andrade. So for her, she's going to have to use her jab. She's going to have to use her speed and try and put Jessica Andrade on her back. Do I see that happening? I don't. I wouldn't want to do that against Jessica Andrade. She'll power slam all of us into the next millennia, whatever. So for me, Jessica Andrade, again, though, at minus 230, it's just too much to do a straight bet here. So for us, I think her striking is going to be better. I think her wrestling will be there. But I think Cynthia survives. So at Jessica Andrade by decision, we're going to get it at plus 163 as opposed to the minus 230. And we're also going to probably throw her in our parlay later than that. So if you're an Andrade fan here, which I personally am, she's won me a lot of money over the years, several ways to make money off that. And I think we're good to go with that one.
You know, I'd be curious to know, as I mentioned off the bat, that we've seen Jessica, and this is a rare thing. It's kind of a unique thing, right? We've seen Jessica fight at 135 pounds. Then we saw her fight all the way down to 115, and now we're seeing her at 125. And this is her third fight, I believe, at 125, but she's fought the very, very best. Do you have a good indication of what the difference is between her fighting at 125 or the other weight classes? Or because she's just such a bull in a China shop physical fighter, does it really not matter what weight she's fighting at?
You know what? I think for her, it's whatever the fastest path to get back to a title shot is, especially in a division like this where the depth is not so much there, and style-wise plays into her favor. There's not too many people in this division that will out-wrestle her. There's not too many that are going to have the speed or the striking or the level of competition. She's only really fought the best of the best of the best, and she's been there. And she was an underdog when she's won the title. You know, for me, this is just has Jessica Andrade winning and just making herself known in this new division.
Okay. Well, moving on to that heavyweight fight between Curtis Blades and Jairzinho Rozenstruik, there was a time in which, you know, we'd be looking at these cards and we'd be like, oh, striker versus grappler, striker versus grappler. That doesn't happen as much in modern MMA. I feel like we're looking at striker versus grappler here, and I think Curtis Blades thinks we're looking at it too. I mean, this guy, he sits up at those interviews and he says, yeah, I want to take him down. Of course I want to take him down. He doesn't want to be taken down, and whoever wins that battle is going to win the fight. Is that how you see it, and who do you think wins that fight?
100%. Yeah, this is definitely striker versus grappler here. And Curtis Blades has made it no secret. He does not care if people love him for his style, hate him for his style. He wants to win. In the heavyweight division, it sounds like you're always 3 decent wins away from a title shot. And from Blades, what he needs to learn when he shoots it for those doubles or singles, watch out for the uppercut. With Derek Lewis, he threw it 3 times. Third time was a charm. Blades went nighty-night, messed up everybody's parlay under the sun, right? In this situation, I don't see Rozenstruik having that same success as Derek Lewis, simply because he fights off his back foot. foot. He's more of a counter striker. And because he's going to be waiting for the takedowns, Blades also is a pretty good striker. So I think if Blades stays on the outside, doesn't rush in and stays away from that uppercut, and really is patient. Listen, this is going to be a Curtis Blades win by decision if he gets it done. And we're getting plus 200 for that one as well.
Well, you know, you sit up here and you try not to dive too much, at least I don't try not to dive too much into the psychology. If you're going to be kind of dabble in that, you got to be careful, because I think you can pick up on some things that aren't there. But I will say, you know, as I mentioned right off the bat when talking about this fight, Curtis Blades is coming off of that loss to Derek Lewis. And how much does that stick with you? Now, when I watch that guy talk, he says, hey, I was turned into a highlight. Highlights are called highlights for a reason. Like, you're going to see that a lot. I am going to see that a lot, but I was upset about it for a while, and then I've carried on. Like, you're going to get highlighted in this sport from time to time. But in your first fight back from something like that, is that any cause for concern? Any pause that says, hey, you know, is it going to be in the back of his head?
It could be, and because of that, I think he even goes to the wrestling even more and not try to strike and try to show off his new skills that he may be practicing in the gym, especially against a guy in Rosenstrike, which we know once he's on his back, he's not going to be a submission threat. You know, he's not going to be pulling off triangle chokes. If he does, good for him. Throw him the money then, right?
Yeah.
For Curtis Blades, I think he plays this really safe. I think he goes to the wrestling early and often, and that's usually what happens with guys. When they're so comfortable in a way that's been getting them to this level, after a loss like that, you make the adjustments and you go back to what got you here, and that's going to be his wrestling. There's no question there.
Well, let's talk about the fight that everybody wants to hear about. That is Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler. At the beginning of the week, I would have said, hey, we're talking about a welterweight fight. No, we're talking about a middleweight fight now, because Nick, you really didn't go into a lot of detail, but he did not want to cut the weight. Robbie agreed, so now we're fighting at 185 pounds. And look at the line movement here, minus 110 on Wednesday. Thursday, you see the big jump. Robbie moves to minus 135, and as of right now, Caesars has it minus 155 for Mr. Robbie Lawler, who, by the way, has lost to Nick Diaz, but it was 17 years ago, so I don't know how much weight we're going to put on that. Your thoughts on the matchup and also the line movement that we just saw?
Well, for whoever was betting Robbie Lawler, it's clearly your fault. It's clearly your fault. And those for Nick Diaz should be thanking you. You know, I think this was going to happen. Your interview showed a lot with Nick Diaz. It showed how he's so worried about losing, how he really doesn't like fighting, and it's kind of a weird thing to see out of the Diaz brother when they just thrive when the doors are locked behind them in the cage. It seems like they're born fighters, but this is a little bit of an uncomfortable situation, it seems like. Also, the weight. We've never seen that with Nick before. Coming in a few days, I want to go up to the next weight class. But if he needed a dance partner that was going to welcome that flexibility, he found one in Robbie Lawler. I just think for this fight, with Nick Diaz, he has to come forward, but Robbie Lawler is going to come forward also, and it's going to be speed versus power. I favor the power of Robbie Lawler. I think Lawler's physicality, plus the biggest thing, the inactivity of Nick Diaz. How do you expect a fighter 6 years out to come in, and everyone's expecting him to fight like he was before? I don't expect that. I don't think it's going to happen either. So I think Robbie Lawler, his activity, and he's been fighting the best of the best ever since. So I'm very curious to see how Nick does this, but I think Robbie Lawler, even at minus 150, it's okay to play him. I like that value. Anything above that, sit back and enjoy, and let's just hope for one of the better fights on the card that's being advertised.
You do. It's not too late to bet on Robbie Lawler because, yeah, the line did move significantly, so I'm sure you're looking at that graphic if you hadn't put money down yet on Robbie Lawler, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I should have got a much better line than this. I will say that, you know, after sitting with Nick, obviously the way in which the interview went, if you did see it, his body language and just his tone was he wasn't happy to be there. But you got to remember, he came into Vegas on Tuesday. You know, we sat down and spoke with him on Wednesday. It was his first fight week in a very long time. I think he was, you know, any one of us would be entering that atmosphere and kind of, you know, adjusting to it for the first time in a long time. I thought he looked more comfortable at the press conference on Thursday. I thought he looked very comfortable at the weigh-in, staring down Robbie. I mean, he didn't look like a guy who was kind of shying away from it. He's got more of his team around him. I think, like, you saw his brother Nate accompany him. So a little bit better vibes, I thought, from Nick, and I think that's going to be what you see, because Nick has always been the kind of guy who comes into fight week, he doesn't really want to be there, but hey, I mean, we know what this guy does in the octagon. By the time he gets there, then he turns into the fighter, and I think by the time he makes this walk behind us, that's the guy that we'll see.
I agree. It did seem as we went on the press conference, and then along with the weigh-ins, Nick kind of got used to the crowd, because since he's left, this has gotten bigger. This has gotten crazier. The fans are more involved in these events, which Nick doesn't always love, neither does Nate. However, this time around, he seemed to thrive on a little bit. And he even said, if I lose, I want back in. We've never heard him say that.
Yeah.
We've never heard him say, believe me, if I get my ass whooped. And he's talking about it. So I think his mind is better than what people think. I still think Robbie Lawler, though, is the play in this fight.
It's an absolutely fascinating fight, man. I will be on the edge of my seat. Not only because, hey, we were already looking to this fight already, just between Robbie Lawler and Nick Diaz. You tell fight fans that, they're going to want to watch. But now, after that interview and the candidness of Nick Diaz, I want to see how he looks and how he attacks this fight. Let's move on to Miss Valentina Shevchenko. And I feel like, Ian, when you talk about Valentina and trying to bet on Valentina, it's pretty much the same story every time, right? Look at these odds, these closing odds of her title defenses. We're not giving these women too much of a chance to dethrone the champ, and, you know, the books have gotten it right. Clearly, Valentina is just absolutely dominant. She stands head and shoulders above absolutely everybody in this division. So what do you do with her? How do you try to bet a Valentina Shevchenko title fight?
Is it weird that I don't mind minus 1,500 at this point based on what we just saw?
Weird.
Right? It's a little weird. No, we're going to strike that down. For Valentina, look, she always looks to finish. Very few times it's gone to decision, and I think for this fight, she will get to finish inside the distance. You can either take that at minus 250 or I think by TKO or KO, personally at minus 120. Look, if you're able to shrink down a bet at minus 1,500 all the way down to that low, that's worth a shot just out the gate right there. Valentina is so well-rounded. Wherever the fight goes, she doesn't care what her opponent says, does, anything. She's prepared for anything under the sun. Valentina, minus 120 by TKO or KO. I think that's the way to go here.
I agree with you, because if you are going to bet Valentina, of course, you don't want to bet that minus 1,500. At the beginning, I think it opened at minus 900. So if you're going to bet Valentina, you got to get on it immediately. But I also just get this vibe from Valentina that you're right. She does want to finish these fights. And I think that comes to do with, you know, her commitment level to MMA, that she's always looking for that way to, like, hey, I should be able to finish a fight. But also, I think there's a little bit of a competitor in her. Every time this woman does an interview, she's asked about Amanda Nunes. She sees on the pound-for-pound rankings that Amanda Nunes is ahead of her. How does she ever try to topple that? Well, she's got to fight her a third time, and she's got to keep finishing these fights. She's got to keep impressing us, and it's hard to impress us when you're a 15-1 betting favorite. So I do think that she comes in motivated by the idea of finishing her opponent. Real quick, though, Lauren Murphy. I mean, I'm sure that there are some people walking into the book saying, oh, man, plus 950, plus 10. I mean, I'll just throw my lunch money on that and see if I can go to a nice steak dinner tonight. If Lauren Murphy wins, how does she do it? Does she have a path to victory here?
Well, look, as you said, some people might want to bet this, and if they're up money, why not? You're playing with the house anyway. Look, it's so hard to say, yes, she has a shot here, or the path to victory. It's MMA. Anything can happen with the small gloves once you're inside the cage. I think for Lauren Murphy, the way to win this fight is to put Valentina on her back, watch out for the arm bar, be able to get elbows down on her, get some ground and pound, and steal a couple of rounds. Now, do I see that happening? I don't. But if she can pull that off and take this fight the distance and land and make it competitive, I still think if she's able to survive, that's a big, big feather in her cap.
Yep.
But for that plus 900 number, yeah, she's going to have to really pull off something special here.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody can survive against Valentina Shevchenko, it's been proven to be a feather in your cap. But let's get to this 145-pound main event. I got to tell you, Ian, that this is the fight. I wrote a column about this earlier this month. This is the number one fight I've been looking forward to that's booked on the end of the year, just because of how competitive I think it is. I think Alexander Volkanovski is such a professional. He just checks off every box. He comes so well prepared. But there's something about Brian Ortega, man, like the mystery of it, the fact that we've only seen him once over the last 3 years, and he changed so much, and then he looked so good doing it against Korean Zombie. Very curious to get your... Vegas likes Volkanovski. The odds are in his favor, as they should be. This guy just came off of 10 rounds with Max Holloway, and he still has the belt around his waist that tells you how good he is. But how are you looking at this fight? Do you see value on Brian Ortega?
I do see value on Brian Ortega. You know, let me start with Volkanovski first here. With Volkanovski, I think he's probably one of the more undervalued champions, probably because he's soft-spoken and he hasn't fought in a while. My concern with him is his fight between Max Holloway 1 and 2, I didn't see that many improvements. I felt that he kind of fought the same, and some people thought Max Holloway won that fight. Now, the scorecard still played towards the champ. However, in this situation, I like to say you're only as good as your last fight. And between the two, the improvement's been by Ortega, leaps and bounds. Now, Korean Zombie is a different fighter than Volkanovski, but the striking of Brian Ortega looked so good. His precision, he was patient, and he carries power. And because of that, his ground game became so much more dangerous. And him on the ground is a scary thing. If he's able to put Alexander Volkanovski on his back, he could threaten with submissions, ground and pound. I don't think Volkanovski is dangerous off his back at all in the situation, nor has he really been in that position. And he will be against Brian Ortega in a 5-round fight. So for me, if you're going to take a stab at this, with Volkanovski being out due to COVID, not fighting in 2 years, I like Brian Ortega based on his past work against the Zombie, plus 160, and new. I'm riding the T-City train.
Yeah, and you said the magic words, plus 160. I mean, I don't know if I had to do a money line here, and it was pick'em. I don't know if my pick would be the same, but if I see plus 160, I see some advantages that Brian Ortega might have. First of all, he's a finisher. We know that. I mean, as he was coming up and even getting to the title the first time against Max Holloway, that was the story on him, right? That he could be losing a fight and just snatch up a neck just like that, and that has gone nowhere. He still has that. But I also look at the size, and I know that Max Holloway had some size on Volkanovski, but it just puts the onus on Volkanovski. He has to come in. He has to close that distance. He has to figure out that range. Brian doesn't need to. Brian can fight at a longer range. And as Alex comes in, I actually think Brian has more power than Max Holloway. Max Holloway is a phenomenal striker, maybe the best in the sport, but Brian has shown the ability to drop guys, that Frankie Edgar elbow, the back elbow on Korean Zombie. This guy's very dangerous, and once he hurts you, then you're dealing with his submission skills. So at plus money, I agree with you. I do think that that's probably the side I would take. However, I've spoken to a lot of smart people who've told me this ain't going to be a competitive fight. Alex Volkanovski is going to go out there and just outclass him because Alex Volkanovski is that good. And that's why I'm so looking forward to this main event. Any final thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, you know, you made a good point with Alexander Volkanovski, and especially with Brian Ortega's range and the power that he carries. For Volkanovski, though, he's got to go back to the well, those leg kicks, and I think Ortega is ready for that. I think the blueprint to beating him is kind of obvious in a weird way, especially with Volkanovski, that jab, that range, and if he could bring this fight to the floor and avoid that calf kick, those legs, and be able to just keep the power within that, I think Ortega has really got a good shot. And you made a phenomenal point. You strip away the odds here, I would have leaned Ortega as well.
Well, it's going to be a phenomenal main event. I think it's going to be competitive. I think both guys are going to have to make adjustments on the fly, so very much looking forward to that. Before we wrap things up, let's take a look at the biggest line movements on the card, because this will tell us a lot, right? And you're seeing where the money is going. Valentina Shevchenko, wow, never saw that one coming, did you, Ian? That people like Valentina Shevchenko. Talia Santos, again, going against Roxanne Modafferi. Matthew Semelsberger, you know, going up to almost the biggest favorite on the card. If Valentina wasn't on there, she's always going to be the biggest favorite on the card. And then Merab Dvalishvili. Man, look at that movement. Opened minus 110 against Marlon Moraes, and now it's currently sitting at minus 260. Whew. So we've talked a lot about every fight on the card. Ian, it's time to put your money where your mouth is. What is your parlay for this evening?
So we're going to, like I said earlier, we have a lot of big favorites, and in order to really get value out of them, outside of props, I say we bring this down to a parlay. We're going to go Semelsberger, Santos, Andrade, and we're going to go Chris Daukaus. And by doing that, taking all the favorites, you're minimizing your risk with a nice reward of plus 217.
I like it. Plus 217, and a lot of names on there that should get the wins, as you mentioned. Okay, I'm going to throw together just a little fun one here. Let me see what we got. I like the Hooker fight.
All right.
That you mentioned. So let's do Hooker. Let's do Omar Morales, so I can have some action right off the bat on the first fight of the card. And then you know what? Let's throw in.
You're gonna make us real sweaty on the first fight, huh?
Let's throw in our guy Robbie Lawler. So Robbie Lawler, Omar Morales, Dan Hooker, and that should pay out. They're going to tell me here, right here. Plus 351.
Look at that math.
Plus 351, man. That'll be a happy guy at the end of the night if I'm making plus 351 on my Okamoto parlay. Ian, this has been fun, man. Final thoughts on UFC 266. It's about to start.
I'm looking forward to it. We got our money out there. We got our plays. We're ready to rock between our parlays, our props, our straight picks. It's time to make money. Let's go.
Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this show. I know I certainly have. We've been talking about these fights all week, so it's fun to talk about them with some stakes involved, your own personal stakes. You can get out there, you can throw some money on it, and enjoy the fights even more. There it is, T-Mobile Arena. We are inside it, and the fights will be inside it not very, very shortly. Make sure you buy UFC 266 on ESPN+. Enjoy the fights.